And CBS News foreign correspondent Holly Williams joins us now from Istanbul. Holly, what then is the latest now on the evacuation efforts there?
Well, Josh, without a ceasefire, and it appears that the ceasefire has collapsed, there can be no evacuation. And that means that around 50,000 civilians, according to the UN, men, women and children are trapped in rebel-held areas in Aleppo, and that is now a tiny pocket, a handful of neighbourhoods that are still under the control of rebel fighters.
And the fear of those who remain in eastern Aleppo, as we saw in your piece, is palpable. And yet, if they are able to flee, especially eastern Aleppo, Holly, what happens to them then?
Well, Josh, assuming that they're evacuated to other areas in Syria that are held by rebel forces, they're still at risk. They may not be at risk of the same kind of street fighting that they've endured for months, if not years, in eastern Aleppo, but they're at risk of being targeted by airstrikes from both the Syrian regime and Russian forces that are backing up the Syrian regime. I think the exception to that would be people who are able to be evacuated to parts of northern Syria that are rebel-held and then perhaps may use that as an opportunity to cross into the safety of Turkey, for instance.
Aleppo has meant so much to the rebel cause throughout this civil war. What will it mean then for the regime of Bashar al-Assad if this city falls?
Well, to all intents and purposes, the Syrian regime is now in control of the city of Aleppo. There is just a tiny sliver of land that's controlled by the rebels, and it really seems to be a matter of when, not if, that pocket is going to fall. This is clearly a major strategic victory for the Syrian regime. And let's be clear, the Syrian regime has achieved that in large part by indiscriminately bombing its own people. It is a major setback for the rebels. But I guess the question is whether this somehow brings an end to the Syrian civil war. And I don't see that happening immediately because there's no indication that the Syrian rebels are about to give up. And in fact, their position has always been that they won't give up while Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian president, is still in office.
And Holly, in light of the reports that 82 civilians were executed yesterday, it is but one of a list of atrocities from which we've heard. In fact, we heard Samantha Power there shaming her colleagues at the UN. Is there any belief, though, that there will be a U.S. response?
Well, the US has tried very concertedly to avoid direct conflict with the Syrian regime over the 5 years of this civil war. It's not that the US isn't involved in Syria. It's carrying out airstrikes against ISIS. US special forces operate with Kurdish alliances in northeastern Syria. And the US is arming Syrian rebels. But it's tried very hard to avoid intervening directly in this conflict. And I think a big part of that is that the US doesn't want to get involved in a conflict with two of the countries that are backing the Syrian regime. And those countries are Russia and Iran. A conflict like that would be dangerous for the US, dangerous for the Middle East, and dangerous for the entire world. But the cost of that has been this ongoing, horrifying conflict that has cost so many thousands of lives in Syria.
Holly Williams in Istanbul, we do appreciate the insight.